You will have heard in the last few years loads and loads and loads about the WEF, the World Economic Forum. But who are they? How did they come to be? And how come they have such a grip on life in so many countries and on government policies? That's what we're going to be talking about in this video.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
Hi, everybody, it's Crypto Rich. I'm not working with you to get rich with crypto in this video. I'm working with you to get informed and to stay free. I'm joined by Johnny Vedmore. He's a journalist and a presenter on TNT Radio, and he's been kind and gracious enough to have me on his channel several times. And I'm returning the favor. And we're going to be talking about the WEF. Now, before I introduce him, please subscribe, follow me on Twitter, CryptoRichYT, join my official Telegram announcements channel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, there might be things in here that YouTube doesn't like because they deleted one of my videos recently because I interviewed a scientist about climate change and they didn't like what this scientist had to say. So come and support my work on bit.ly/CryptoRich3Speak, bit.ly/CryptoRichOdySEE, and it's not up there, and one day it will be up there, bit.ly/CryptoRichRumble. Hey, Johnny, thank you so much for making yourself available.
That's all right. I always like to have a chat with people, so it all seems good. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Now, do you want to start by saying where people can find you and find your work and where you are and what you do?
Yeah, okay. Well, it's a complicated one. I'm currently presenting the Johnny Vedmore Show on TNT Radio, and I have many guests on. GMT time is 5 to 7 weekdays, but mostly I'm an investigative journalist. You can find my work at Newspaste. I've written for UK Column and Limited Hangout, a couple of other minor sites, and but mainly at newspaste.com. And there you'll find a range of work, everything from documentaries to long-form articles. I do very deep investigative research. My thing is finding the information that no one else can seem to find, thinking about things objectively, not getting distracted by the parts of a story and telling the story from A to Z with all of the bits in between, not getting distracted when I get to C or D or E or F and going, oh my God, okay, I'm going to write the story now, try and find out every single bit of information I can find. And then you get from that, you get a beginning, middle and end. I try and tell people regularly, if they want to write, you want to research, you want to put down everything in chronological order, and then out of it comes the story, and then you put your opinion at the end. And that's really what I do. But I also do lots of other things. I do auditing. I make documentary movies, but auditing by police auditing, if you don't know what that means, or First Amendment auditing in the America, where you basically film police and do lots of public filming and keep our rights in that way to make sure we've got an eye on the people who've got an eye on us. But yeah, I have the Newspaste podcast, which got to start up again. Newshound is a good show where I go through source material. So I do lots and lots and lots of different things, but you can find it all at newspaste.com.
Right, okay, and I shall link to that, and also your Twitter and your TNT show, so people can go and follow that, and come and listen to me if you haven't listened to me enough on this channel. Okay, so one of the things that you have looked into is the World Economic Forum, how they came to be, and then also how come they have so much influence. And then also we may also touch upon that, the climate change agenda, because I think people think that there was some sort of great revelation when it came to climate science, that these scientists did these experiments, but actually it's far more insidious and devious than that, and has a lot less credible science behind it than anything else. It is a political movement, and we'll touch upon that. But let's start. Well, where do you want to start? Which came first?
Isn't it so? Well, the idea came first for political leadership programs, and really, where I started with this was I was sitting around a coffee table in Chile. It was summer, December in Chile because it's down there, and I was we were trying to work out. It was me and Whitney Webb, and she said, no one knows about Klaus Schwab's history. No one knows who his father or mother were. No one knows any of the information about the real rise of him. maybe you should just go and check out who his family was. I was doing a lot of family history stuff at the time, so and a lot of my work revolves around trying to work out the hidden histories behind people. So often the best place to go to understand somebody is to understand their mother and father and their grandparents and their great grandparents and so on and so forth. So I mix those in together quite a lot. So it seemed like a no-brainer. Nobody knew. I mean, you went to Klaus Schwab's page and it didn't say who his parents were. You couldn't find it anywhere. You could find rumors. Some people were like, it's this guy and he's related to a Rothschild or whatever, or it's this guy, his last name's Schwab and he was a Nazi officer, so it must be this guy. And it wasn't that guy. And so I went away and tried to work out what it was that I needed to look for. I had got given 6 weeks. Yeah, come up here, Kat. I got given 6 weeks to try and find out who Klaus Schwab was, and I managed to do it in that time. I wasn't luck. It was very much hard work. A lot of time going through Swiss newspaper archives and German Landschrift sort of info, trying to understand why I couldn't find anything about Klaus Schwab was really a good starting point. And eventually, after probably about 4 or 5 weeks, I had confirmed for sure. But the best document is, I think it's in the first article, which was called Schwab Family Values in the Schwab series. I think the second source is one of the best pieces of information because basically it was from a Swiss court where Klaus Schwab's father, who was a guy called Eugen Schwab, was trying to get permission to return and get Swiss nationality because his father had once had Swiss nationality, and post World War II in the 50s, the Schwabs were very nervous because they had been involved in a very important program that the Nazis were running, and his father was actually someone very important. So I found this document. I was able to work out who he was, and then it was a case of who his father was. Then it was a case of going back through history and discovering what he did. And it was just astounding, really, truly astounding, because his father was a... Sorry?
Sorry, I was just saying, tell us, and then you just started.
Oh, yeah. Well, his father was a guy called Eugen Schwab. Sorry, I got my cat here who's terrible. She wants to be involved in all of this. His father was a guy called Eugen Schwab, which is amazing because, you see eugenics Schwab. That's so funny. And I thought that was going to be it. Like, I was finding out who his father was, who his mother was, and then it was going to unroll like his father was a manager, a bank or something, and then he sent him to university and so on and so forth. But that's not how it was. In 1938, when Klaus Schwab was born, his father, Eugen Schwab, worked as the managing director of a Nazi model company, of a company that was listed within a book that came out every quarterly called Nazi Model Companies. These were the best Nazi companies you could possibly get. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. He was the managing director. What did they do? I went through the whole history of this company, which was called Escher Weiss. I went back to when it was created in the 1860s under Walter Zuppinger, started creating lace for weaving and stuff like this. But before you knew it, in the 1900s, it was starting to make parts for hydroelectric dam projects. And those parts were large turbines for the dams, and making massive turbines, enormous turbines, there's only a couple of companies in the world that were doing that at that time, and one of them was Escher Weiss. By the time it got round to World War II, and where Klaus Schwab was born in 1938, his father was managing this company, Escher Weiss, and they were making large turbines that could be used to make heavy water so that they could refine uranium and make it rich enough to create the atomic bomb. And so it was the Nazi atomic bomb program. It was central to that. They had to take these large turbines and they had to take them up to Norway or wherever it was they were doing their business. It meant that Eugen Schwab was a very important part of the Nazi Wehrmacht in that way. He was, the company also made parts for planes, for fighter planes, parts for U-boat submarine parts. The potential casings for atomic bombs were made by Escher Weiss. And the company got special dispensation during the war from the Allies that the town wouldn't be bombed. So even the Allies, I think in these situations they're like, oh, we know that means something important's going on there. We can try and get our spies in there, so let's not bomb it. And so the town of Ravensburg and Escher Weiss had special dispensation not to be bombed by the Allies throughout the entire war. The only place to have that, and it was a place that used slave labor to achieve its aims as well. So that was, to start off, very interesting. Of course, Klaus Schwab's father was a Nazi. Not only a Nazi, he was a managing director of a Nazi model company that was helping create the Nazi atomic bomb program. So I was really excited by that. That was a brilliant story in itself. But then what was really interesting was following the time forward and discovering that Klaus Schwab himself worked for Escher Weiss. When Klaus Schwab finally left university eventually, he went to work for his father's company as second in charge. Now, when his father was there, the first in charge, he was really second in charge of Escher Weiss's father, and the first in charge was a guy called Jakob Schmidheiny. And Jakob Schmidheiny was a Swiss guy who was very high up. Now, by the time Klaus Schwab had got to be second in charge of Escher Weiss, the head of the company was Jakob Schmidheiny's son. I think his name was Peter Schmidheiny. And it's a very interesting, because when Klaus Schwab left Harvard, Schmidheiny phoned him and said, "Hey, Klaus, we got a new project going on. We want to merge Schulze AG, Escher Weiss, and Brown Boveri Company, and we want to create this new company out of it. We want to make Schulze Escher Weiss, and we want to make it a success. You've just been to Harvard, and you know about business. Why don't you come over and you do this job?" And so when I followed this first, I thought, oh, that's really interesting. He worked for his father's company. But he didn't only go work for his father's company. Klaus Schwab repeated the history almost perfectly. He becomes second in charge under a Schmidheiny, and then that company goes on to sell illegally nuclear weapons technology to the apartheid South African regime. While they were creating their project at Pelindaba to create their nukes, and they ended up with 7 or 8 nuclear bombs by the end of it, the apartheid regime, and it was illegal to sell them nuclear weapons technology. Yet, under Klaus Schwab's leadership, that's what Escher Weiss were doing. Now, Switzerland, I discovered this because in 1992, I think it was, around then, early 90s, Switzerland did an inquest, because Escher Weiss is officially a Swiss company. It was created in Switzerland, but it had the Ravensburg branch, and the Nazis were accepted as, well, they're just doing their business, and it's kind of a separate company over there. So Escher Weiss is kind of separate, but it wasn't. And there was a lot of crossover between the Swiss. So the Swiss had a bit of an inquiry about why why a company and multiple companies actually sold illegally nuclear weapons technology to the apartheid South African regime. And then they the inquiry settled down the issue, and they said, okay, now we can move on. And no one's going to be charged for any of this, because we've had we've all kissed and made up now. So Schwab never even got held to account for his part in selling nuclear weapons technology to an apartheid South African regime at all. But he had repeated what his father did. And I was like, I wrote that article up, which was about, really, it's called Schwab Family Values. Of course, because it was about, that sort of Schwab dynasty and how they did exactly the same thing. But there was a little bit in there in the end about the start of the World Economic Forum. And when I finished it, I said it was a really good article. And a really good article is, when you write an article like that, it's really good because you feel completely detached from it. Every moment that I was writing, every paragraph was a new discovery I was making along the way. By the end of it, I would never have even been able to imagine the article as it was by the end. At the beginning, I could never even imagine it all. That's when you know it's a good article. When you did not write it yourself, you just put the words down on the page. Yeah, and the words spoke for themselves. So I didn't feel like I wanted to do much more than concentrate on that and then walk away and think. And I did a load of other articles. I mean, the pandemic hit, and this was December 2020. So I had arrived in Chile, and probably something like 3-4 days later, we were under severe lockdown where you could only go out for 2 hours a week with a pass and stuff, and it was like really super strict out there. And being in South America under a strict lockdown, you kind of like go, oh my god, maybe I should behave myself loads, But I just ended up like throwing myself into work and doing loads. But it took me a while. Probably about a year before I wrote the second part, which is called Dr. Klaus Schwab, or How the CFR Taught Me to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. And it was quite extraordinary because I'd been researching for that entire year for that article, but I didn't know what it would look like, and I didn't know what I was looking for, and I didn't know what the story was. I kept going through this problem in my head. I've written this article about Schwab's parents, or Schwab's father, and this nuclear stuff. And then he goes on and creates the World Economic Forum. But it just seems like there's a gap in between where something important must have happened to get him from there to there. It couldn't just be that simple. Oh, he left Harvard and then he created the World Economic Forum. There's got to be a reason behind the series of events. So I kind of spent a long time researching it, thinking a lot. And when I finally found the information, the most important information, it was like within 2 weeks, the article had written itself. And it was an incredible. It's probably my most. It's described by some as my seminal piece. So it's like the top article that's probably been read by the most people. And what it was very special. For me, it was very special because, again, it was like I found out a load of new information that changed my entire worldview, my entire perspective. Everything about the world changed while I was researching and writing this article. And I started to understand things in a way that I started to understand how we got to where we are now in every part of our lives through this one article. And what the clincher was, what the thing that made the point, what that bit that was missing in between was solved. Schwab didn't just go to Harvard. He didn't just go to Harvard, and then he'd already had degree after degree after degree, and he went and studied under Kissinger, and that was a course. Henry Kissinger. You're thinking, okay, how does that work? Hey, Klaus Schwab's a young Schwab. He's in a classroom, and Henry Kissinger's leaning over him. He's telling him, "You've got to do this evil thing now, Klaus. Oh, yes, that's a good idea. Or you've got to do this evil thing. Oh, that's probably a good idea as well." And they're collecting evil things they can do together, and they're thinking about how they could take over the world. And that's the simplistic view. And then I thought, I really want to understand what Kissinger was doing at the time. So I'm just going to go back through history and I'm going to check out what was happening in Harvard during that period. I'm very much about the environment, that was, and I'm not talking about the environment in the way we mean it together. I mean the environment people were brought up into, or people are taught in, or people work in. That tells you a lot. I mean, our own environments shape us, and our own experience is only experienced because we were in a certain area with a certain bunch of people, and it had a culture, and it had like a buzz about it, and then things happen. And this is one of those places, because I discovered he didn't go and just study a degree. No, he says, I was allowed to sit in on Kissinger's international seminar, and I didn't have to pay anything, and that was very nice. They let me off. No one paid for Kissinger's international seminar. No one paid for that because you were selected for Kissinger's international seminar. You were selected probably partially because of what your parents have done before you, but mainly because of his massive amount of degrees and the obvious fact that he was an academic. He thrived. Klaus Schwab thrived in academia. He loved it. So he had already had like 3 or 4. They were throwing honorary degrees at him already. He's a young man, and he goes to a place for 6 months, and they give him a degree that would take anybody else 4 years. So you could see how these sort of like people build up degrees. So he got a name for himself. And Kissinger's international seminar, I was like, okay, what is this? What is this? And I delved into it, and it was incredible. It was incredible because it wasn't long before I was reading in the New York Times archives, and I found Kissinger's international seminar. And this was the moment where the article went from a year's research to 2 weeks written up, was the moment that I discovered the Kissinger's international seminar in 1967, just as Klaus Schwab is leaving, just after Klaus Schwab's leaving. Ramparts magazine and New York Times in America are about to reveal that it was CIA funded between the years of 1961 and 1966 by 3 different conduits that included the Fairfield Foundation, American Friends of the Middle East, and the Asian Foundation. And this was really important. This was massively. Klaus Schwab had gone through a CIA-funded Kissinger course at Harvard. So what did all of that mean? What does that mean? What happened while he was there, and what was going on? And there wasn't much clue about what happened with Schwab's life, because, of course, all of that was hidden. You couldn't find anything before 1969, before I started looking around and digging things up. But there was lots hidden around, including Hugh Wilford, The Mighty Wurlitzers, which is a brilliant book and describes a lot of the CIA-funded programs that were happening in places like Harvard and how these people like Cord Meyer, William Yandell Elliott, and other bigwigs of the CFR were, and Kissinger and others were, of course, were manipulating the world, and why, more importantly, why they were doing it.
So, hold on a second. Thank you for that. The CFR, for people who don't know, if you could just in a couple of sentences say what that is, Council for Foreign Relations.
Yeah, Council on Foreign Relations is a roundtable group. A roundtable group, probably you could say a Rhodesian roundtable group. So it's basically one of the groups full of people get membership to it. You know, you get a nod and a wink. The people like Henry Kissinger, of course, got into CFR quite early. And Council on Foreign Relations, it's changed throughout time. Now it's very much more like it's kind of like an intelligence policy institute, I would define it today. Back then, they were hiding it a lot more. I mean, you see a lot of, if you go and look about Council on Foreign Relations and you look through Hoover memos, you've got a load of these letters people wrote to FBI and other establishments saying, this Council on Foreign Relations, we should really worry about them. They've got loads of power, and how is this happening? And basically, it's a load of really old guys sitting around. They're very boring, but they're deciding and planning our lives. And they've been doing this for years. Now, you'll get a gist from following this story of how the Council on Foreign Relations work, because Kissinger is where you have to go next, really. I knew he was responsible for the international seminar, but I wanted to understand Klaus Schwab's journeys. For that, I needed to understand his mentors. It's not only his parents that I needed to understand, it's the people who guided him through life. And Kissinger, he was someone who got recruited by the CFR. Probably, I think it was about 1954 he gets recruited. The way it works, Kissinger, 1937, 38, his family's fleeing Germany. They land in New York. Within no time, Kissinger's back over in Europe in the army, and he's under the tutelage of Fritz Kramer, a Nietzschean firebrand, as he's described somewhere, with a monocle in his eye and screaming and crazy. He was fighting both the communists and fascists back in the days in the streets and running battles in the streets. He took no side apart from his own. And he was very important to Kissinger because he taught him a lot of different things. He taught him basically, one of the lessons was thinking too much won't win you the game. You've got to feel it. And this is something we all kind of know, but in their world it means something different. When Kissinger left the army and when he started to enter into studies, he completely and utterly shone. He was at Harvard. In 1950 he completed his dissertation, and his Harvard dissertation was the longest ever written in Harvard history. It was lauded by loads of people. All of the professors, the academics were all saying he's the best thing since sliced bread. And he was noticed straight away. And in 1950, he wanted to join the FBI. And a load of different people got involved at that point and said, no, that's not what you're going to be doing. Instead, William Yandell Elliott, another CFR grandee, an advisor to 6 different presidents, one of the guys who's in the background, the CFR guys who hangs around in the Oval Office and tells people what to do, tells the president what to do, one of those guys. But really intelligent guy, extremely intelligent. One of a group of Fabians, they believe in the slow process of depopulation and the advance towards technology at the same time, sort of in that ilk. And in 1950, he created Kissinger's International Seminar. It was created in 1950. Kissinger, in his letters to Yandell Elliott, said it should have been called Yandell Elliott's International Seminar because he was the person who was behind it. But this is what happened. Grandees of the CFR recruit the next generation and put them into places where they're going to be most appropriate. And what Kissinger's International Seminar was the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader program. It was the original. They had seen that this sort of thing had worked over and over again in loads of different universities, especially in Prussian education system. There was a lot about lifting up certain people, people who were exceptional at academia. And so Kissinger's International Seminar started off being 50 people of the highest educational degrees who were the most clever around would be invited to Harvard to take part in a summer school. It wasn't taking part during the time when the kids were in. Oh no, this was, you had to be quiet about this one. And at the start, yeah, it was, I believe it was 50 raised to 200 within about 10 years. And everything would be paid for. I found an advert for Kissinger's International Seminar called Harvard's International Seminar as well, in the Lahore Military Gazette in India. And it gives a brilliant advert.
Sorry, Johnny, not India. It was Lahore's in Pakistan. It was.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. I do apologize.
Right.
But yeah, Lahore. So in the Lahore, India, the Pakistani press is this. It's very important. Pakistan is actually very important in this entire story, and there's a lot more to be told about that. I've actually got an article which is what I describe as 2.5 of this series. It's in between this article I'm describing now and the second article going on, and is about Benazir Bhutto's mentorship by basically the same people Schwab was mentored by at Harvard. So getting back to it though, Kissinger's International Seminar was really important. Up until 1967, it hadn't been exposed as a CIA-funded program. And they were able to get away with a lot during that time. And they trained up global leaders galore. Valéry Destaing, who became one of the presidents of France, one of the prime ministers of Israel, one of the leaders of Japan. There was Pierre Trudeau went through Kissinger's International Seminar, of course, Justin Trudeau's father. And of course, Justin Trudeau goes through the Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum, global leader. So there's a generational thing there.
What did the seminar teach? What were people learning in Kissinger's International Seminar?
Yeah, it was a 3-part setup. So the first thing was speakers. People who were potential mentors would come and speak, and their speech and what they talked about would be produced into a magazine called Confluence, which was produced out of there and was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And that was one part of it. The other part was basically like a leadership course, like how to be a leader, how to do all of this. And then another part of it was really, I think, the selection of the mentor program. So it was like a party. People would go to ballroom party. Nancy and Henry would, or Heinz, if you like to call him, would put on this ball where everybody came round to their place, and you had all of the big CFR bigwigs hanging around, and they would introduce them to all these young people, and they would be looking to pair people up with mentors. So there was 3 sections to it. There was 3 distinct sections, and Schwab would be given 2 mentors, which are just they're so important to the history of the world, not just the history of Klaus Schwab. They're the 3 people who affected Klaus Schwab during this period the most. Henry Kissinger, who writes nuclear weapons and foreign policy, comes out in 1957. Going back to Henry Kissinger, because this is the best way to follow it. In 1951, they create Kissinger's International Seminar. At the same time, he's teaching, but then he goes and works for the CFR at the same time. And they're gaming out nuclear, what's going to happen with the bomb, basically. They're trying to decide what the Russians are going to do and what they should do in return. So this was the high-level nuclear game theory. This was the most important time. All of these guys were acting under the idea that they could die at any moment in a nuclear holocaust, and they had to get there first and find some way of preventing it. So they were mapping out what would happen if they dropped a bomb on Moscow, and then Moscow would drop a bomb on Washington, and then boom, 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 they'd go backwards and forwards, and et cetera, et cetera. And they kept mapping out these different strategies, and out of it come 2 things. First of all was perpetual limited warfare, the idea that the best way to stop from being complete devastation on the earth due to nuclear fallout would be to change the style of warfare to be much more like of the past, where in the past, before World War I, the weapons technology wasn't good enough to kill loads of people. People go out on a battlefield. The winner on that battlefield would be the victor, and you would know who the victor was. And it was limited. It was very limited to the size and scale of damage that it could cause the people who lived in the country or the sides taking part. And that changed after World War One. By World War Two, and this time after World War Two, and when it's into the Cold War, they're starting to realize we don't want to launch big bombs. If we launch big bombs, we die. So we've got to go back to being on a battlefield, one against one, and we're fighting in a perpetual and limited fashion. And one of the other mentors, and this is where it leads, because that led Kissinger to write Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy in 1957. And by 1961, the most important book gets written by one of Schwab's eventual mentors that are given to him during Kissinger's international seminar between 65 and 67. A man called Herman Kahn, who's described as the real Dr. Strangelove by many, was a very exuberant. He was full of life. He was a big fat man. He was very clever. He worked for the Hudson Institute before he was at Rand, I think. But he worked at the Hudson Institute, and he was gaming out nuclear theory. And in 1961, he wrote On Thermonuclear War. And On Thermonuclear War described the idea of mutually assured destruction in detail, decided that, okay, if we know that we're going to fire bombs at each other and kill each other, then what does perpetual limited warfare and the different strategies underneath look like? And then they mapped out the different things that different tactics each side would use to get the upper hand on others. This includes everything that we experienced today in warfare, was basically mapped out then. And between that 1957 Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy and the Mutually Assured Destruction of On Thermonuclear War, those two books changed our entire world and set it in stone. It really Dr. Strangelove comes out in 1964, and it's based upon Herman Kahn's idea of mutually assured destruction and what happens. It's a way of describing to people. And Herman Kahn knew Stanley Kubrick, and he's asked one time, did Stanley Kubrick base Dr. Strangelove on him? And he's like, oh no, I asked Kubrick and he promised me that he didn't base it on him. But it was like an amalgamation of these weird characters who was like focused on nuclear policy during that period of time that made up this idea of Dr. Strangelove, including Fritz Kramer, who was a crazy Nietzschean firebrand with a monocle that was Kissinger's mentor. So all of these people were hanging out in the same circles. They were all White House advisors by this point. They were all in the CFR. They were all writing for the CFR magazine, and they were all doing lots of things that were looking to advance the agenda. And what the agenda was, in a sense, was world peace. But then, if you go on a little bit further, world peace by using war. But if you go on a little bit further, by the late 60s, 67, by the time Schwab is leaving Kissinger's international seminar, is about to be given Herman Kahn and a guy called John Kenneth Galbraith as mentors. The whole idea of how war is changing, because Herman Kahn has done the next most important thing you can imagine, which is him and the Hudson Institute mapped out all of the technological advancements we expect to see in the future. Everything. It was called The Year 2000. It was written part by this under State Department funding, and it basically used game theory to map out all of the potential technological advances of the future, and they got nearly everything right. If you go to Dr. Klaus Schwab, or How the CFR Taught Me to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, you go down to the second source from the bottom, and you click on it. That'll take you to crummy.com, and there you'll see all of these different technological advancements. In green, it shows you ones that have been achieved. In yellow, ones that are still to be achieved. And red, ones we haven't achieved yet. And they became a tick sheet. So at the same time, Klaus Schwab, the technocrat, the guy who's trying to create this future now, is leaving Harvard. He's been given the idea by his mentor. Look, these are all the future technologies that we can get to. This is how America wins the race. This is how America stays on top as a global power. This is how we stop from having nuclear war. We get to these technologies first. And Kissinger gave, like I say, Schwab two mentors from that Kissinger's international seminar. One was Herman Kahn, that of course affects him in that way. The other was a really important guy, John Kenneth Galbraith, one of the most infamous statesmen, left wing. He basically led the anti-Vietnam War protest, but it seems again like it might have been someone who was put there to co-opt the movement. But John Kenneth Galbraith was JFK's teacher in Harvard too. He was a guy who was sent over to look at the bombing after World War II by the White House, and was instead sent straight away to interview Albert Speer, who was the head of war armaments, the head of the army, the Nazi Wehrmacht. So he was to question him. He was also sent to Nagasaki and Hiroshima when the bombs went off to look at what the damage had been done. He was always going around. He was the guy. He's 6'8" tall, really big guy, really interesting, advisor to many presidents. He drafted the letter after JFK, the address after JFK got shot as well. He did lots of things like that. He was John Kenneth Galbraith is a really important person. He was the head of the Warburg School in Harvard as well, and he was a really big Harvard alumni. And he was like Kissinger was the right wing, he was the left wing, and they were working together to create a new future together. You know, the things that John Kenneth Galbraith did were really massively important, and he is a very interesting figure, one of the most important men in history, understated CFR member up until about 1974, where he makes this brilliant comment about how he left the CFR because the only thing that CFR meetings would leave you with the feeling of whether you should continue living or not, something like that. You know, it was so boring that you may as well just kill yourself. So he was a very interesting man, but he was one of Schwab's mentors. He was given to him through Kissinger's international seminar, and it's actually he was one of the co-keynote speakers on the first World Economic Forum, where on the stage is Herman Kahn, John Kenneth Galbraith, Otto von Habsburg, and Klaus Schwab, because they went back, and after Klaus Schwab had helped his father's old company sell the nukes to the nuclear technology to the South Africans and set up to be a new company and merged it, suddenly he creates the World Economic Forum. But it's not suddenly. It was created out of a CIA-funded program called Kissinger's International Seminar, and it was meant to be a young global leader program, which was what Kissinger's International Seminar was until 1967, when it got rumbled as being CIA funded. So they went and said, okay, we'll do it in Europe, and we'll call it the European Management Symposium, and then the European Management Forum, and then in 1990s or 1989, 1990, 1991, it becomes the World Economic Forum. The third of the series of articles also covers the fact that the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader Program, when that was reformed, in 1992, 1993, they create the Global Leaders for Tomorrow. The first year, it's Bill Gates, it's Tony Blair, it's Viktor Orban, it's Nicolas Sarkozy, it's Angela Merkel, it's all the big wigs who were going to be put into power. And that was the start of Kissinger's International Seminar reformed into the World Economic Forum. But it got reformed again in 2004 and became what we know today as the Young Global Leader Program. And that got started through funding of $1 million that was given to Schwab as a prize by the Dan David Foundation. They said, you've done so good, Schwab, at doing all this globalist stuff that we want to see. Here you go, here's $1 million prize. What do you want to spend it on? And he was like, I think I'll spend it on creating the Young Forum for Young Global Leaders. And who's on the board of the Dan David Foundation? But none other than Henry Kissinger. So it was just a continuum. It was just a cycle. They needed to create, the Americans needed to be the ones who were training global leaders from around the world. Now, what I mentioned earlier about Pakistan, just as a side note, and I haven't written the article fully yet, it's mostly written, but I can tell you anyway. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who's, of course, I think he was the fourth or fifth Prime Minister of Pakistan, he takes his daughter, Benazir Bhutto, when she's only 16, to Harvard. And he asked John Kenneth Galbraith, who he had met while JFK was going around, and here you go, JFK was going around India, and John Kenneth Galbraith was the ambassador of India under Kennedy. And Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had met him at an event in India, and JFK actually wanted to make John Kenneth Galbraith the ambassador to the Soviet Union. Everything that he did was always big. But instead, he refused, and so he made him ambassador to India. And Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had met John Kenneth Galbraith, struck up a friendship with him, and when Benazir Bhutto was old enough, when she was 16, he took her across to Harvard. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto asked John Kenneth Galbraith, listen, hey, can you mentor my daughter? And John Kenneth Galbraith was doing all of this globalist stuff because it was just as the start of the World Economic Forum. It was about 1970, 1971, where Benazir Bhutto gets to Harvard. And instead, he puts his son, Peter Galbraith, in charge of Benazir Bhutto. Peter Galbraith, who ends up being the one who reads the eulogy at her funeral when she's eventually assassinated. Of course, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto soon after comes. It's really weird tale because he come in conflict in public with Kissinger because Pakistan wanted to beat India to their nuclear program, and so in 1972 Zulfikar Ali Bhutto is pushing for the nuclear program. India achieves its first nuclear blast in 1974, so a couple of years later, and Kissinger publicly threatens Zulfikar Ali Bhutto about trying to get nuclear technology, while behind the scenes, the Americans are feeding Zulfikar Ali Bhutto a different type of nuclear technology they want him to work on. For making the bomb. So there was a lot in there with that. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto eventually gets tried and executed. Benazir Bhutto is also later on, and this is very interesting, later on she's also accused of leaking nuclear technology to the North Koreans and Gaddafi and somebody else. I think it was Gaddafi and somebody else. And that looks like it was directed again by the American deep state. Probably because the more people who have nukes, then mutually assured destruction isn't just about two entities. There's multiple poles to nuclear destruction, and then nobody presses the bomb for sure because you'd have to destroy that country and that country and that country and that country and that country. So it becomes a little bit hard to understand where it goes from there. The World Economic Forum, of course, when that gets rolling, John Kenneth Galbraith becomes very central to. It's like a mixing pot for these big leaders and for people who are on the same agenda. And one of those agendas, of course, is climate change. Maurice Strong is very important within this sort of area. But one of the people, of course, one of the regularly mentioned names would be Aurelio Peche and Limits to Growth and the Club of Rome. And Aurelio Peche was heading up the Club of Rome when Limits to Growth was published. And in the third of the World Economic Forum's meetings as the European Management Symposium, the Limits to Growth was released. It was 1973, and Aurelio Peche becomes a keynote speaker. And there's a lot of interesting things that happen around there. Herman Kahn, who had written the year 2000 and predicted all these technologies, was devastated. He hated the idea of depopulation, the enemy of man being humans, climate change being used. Herman Kahn said, we will be able to have all of the technology we want to change our world in all positive ways. So why would we be worried about it? Why would we need, if we're running out of resources, if you're going to say we're running out of resources on Earth, well, we can mine meteors in the future, or we can go to another planet, or we can do this, or we can do that. We've got loads of ways to survive and to make new worlds. So he wrote then in about 1976, I think it was, where they wrote the next 200 years, which was an extension of the year 2000, and predicted that we would be able to do a lot more, as humans, than what these guys who were negative and were saying we need to limit the population growth, we need to stop this because our climate will be in trouble. And later on, there's another Club of Rome book that comes out that is where they say the enemy of humanity is man. That is a book where it's basically posits that they were thinking, how do we get people to react? How do we get people to do what we say? How do we get people under control? And we came up with climate change as being the best possible option because it scares everybody. And we look around and we see water being polluted, or we see the companies dumping in waste, toxic waste on land, etc. So we see that we've got all of these negatives all around us. We can make people believe with imagination that it's much worse than it is. And at the same time, they are getting all of that same technology Herman Cahn's talking about that could free humanity. They're using it to slave humanity, to control the environment, to control the populations. And so there's one that's really the split. That's one of the things you learn. There's two types of human beings in the world. There's the ones that will look at all the technology. If they had all the technology in the world, they'd use it to make the world better. And then there's the ones who, if they had all the technology in the world, would use it to control the other people. That, those are the two camps, and that really was the World Economic Forum is in the one camp
Is
where
it?
it's control.
Right, right. Because that was the thing I was going to ask you. Is like, what is the point of it? Why do they do all this?
Hmm. What do you mean? Why do they do? Why? I mean that is it. It's just that I think from my own experience, from life experience, from studying the psychology of these people, from reading loads of stuff about what they do, it seems to be that it's quite simply the world is run mostly by narcissists and empaths, and it's not in equal measure. The narcissists long for control, long for power, long to be on top. So they make their way up on top and they get onto top. And most of the people on top, 80-90% of them, will have really extreme narcissistic tendencies, and 10% will be empathic and will be able even be empaths towards the narcissists, will be so empathic that they're able to look over all of the negatives that somebody else. So those I would describe, like Herman Kahn is a sense that person, and John Kenneth Galbraith is that person, where Kissinger is clearly a narcissist who believes he knows better than everybody else and he's got to do what he's got to do if he wants to achieve. He's brought up by mentors like Fritz Kramer, who believes he's in charge, but also William Yandell Elliott, who understands the importance of control, but control with this idea that you can help people. So I think what it is that drives this, what we see as control all around us, is the fact of narcissism. There's a constant dance between the narcissist and the empath. It is as a tale as old as time, and they don't stop dancing at all. They're trying to create the same world, but they got different ideas, and one doesn't have an ability to emotionally attach to other humans, and the other has a load of emotional attachment over human beings. So it expresses like that, and because the majority of power will be gained by those who seek power, that tends to be the people who want control, want to form their control, want to make sure no one else is in control. Those tend to be narcissistic people. So that's why we end up with that. It's just simply the same old dance.
Okay. And Klaus Schwab,
Oh,
big company.
he's. I think he's detached from emotion, so he's definitely a narcissist. Not necessarily, people who's narcissistic. They don't have to be like cackling on the side as they're watching evil things happen. That's more of a psychopath.
Mhm.
Narcissists are just detached from emotional content. They don't have the ability to think about other people objectively. They only think about themselves and the people around them and what they can create and what they can build. And they believe that they know better than everyone else. So there's not even a question of what other people would think.
Yes.
One thing that I was in about 2021, I was in Mexico avoiding lockdowns in the UK, because coming back from Chile, if you go straight back from Chile to Britain, you'd have to go to lockdown for 2 weeks. And so we went through Mexico for 2 weeks instead, where you wouldn't have to. Um, and I ended up being contacted by some guys who were making a film called The Greatest Reset. And part of it, they wanted to talk about Klaus Schwab's ancestry and his rise to power. I'm forgetting what I was going to say about this, but anyway, yeah. So Klaus Schwab's a difficult one to register. He sees himself as extremely important. He seems to know what he seems to think he knows what the rest of the world should be like, and so that's what he's trying to produce.
He
It's
does.
kind of only fair.
So then how come they have so much control? Because one of the things I noticed in lockdown, and and I hadn't, I knew about the World Economic Forum, but they just seemed some sort of like consultancy outfit coming up with good ideas. But during lockdown, what I noticed was how countries with apparently different political parties, different by different persuasion, whether it was a centrist party or a left-wing party or a right-wing party, they were all doing the same things. It's like, this country would announce, oh, we're going to have vaccine passes, and then it would roll out. Other countries would say, yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll do that. And there were very, very few, certainly in the European Union countries and the Anglo nations, there was very little divergence.
Yeah, and a lot of, I mean, Chile was like, you could call it a testbed country for the lockdowns. They implemented them quickly there. They tried out a load of different things. Some of the things worked, some of them didn't, and then they did it over in the West. They did it better over in the West. They did it more efficiently. They took out some of the things that caused trouble in Chile, and they left some in place. I think that what happens is quite simply it's edicts handed down, and they've got to incorporate. I try and explain to people that your politicians. We're in Britain, yeah. So the elections coming up this year, the 2024 elections coming up in a couple of weeks. And you look at Britain. It's got four real main parties. Yeah, you've got Reform that's popped up now, but for 4 years we've had Labour Party, Conservative Party, Liberal Democrats, and the Greens, and that's been the dance for the time being. Those are the dance. Yes, you've got Plaid Cymru in Wales, and you've got Scottish National Party, but these are irrelevant in the grand scheme of things because they will never hold full control of the British Parliament. And really, what you can see those parties as being corners of a box or sides of a box. And that box is where we reside. We reside inside the box. And people decide, well, am I going to vote for that wall of the box? Or am I going to vote for that wall of the box? Or am I going to vote for that wall as a box as a protest? Or am I going to do a super protest and do that wall of the box? And yet you're still remain within the box. And all of those people, however different they sound, they're all being fed the same policies in different wording by the same people. So the policy institutes like the World Economic Forum will go away and they'll write up long policy drafts, and the Aspen Institute will do the same, and other institutes will do the same. And basically they'll be covering roughly the same thing. They'll have the same dynamics, but they'll look different when each party incorporates them. One party will say, I'm going to build back better in this way. And the other will be, I'm going to build back better in this way. And the other is, I'm going to build back better, and I'm going to build back better. But they're all going to build back better. They're all following the agenda. They're all following the line. The end result is exactly the same, whichever party you get. The beginning, you're in the box. And all of the way in between, the only difference is the words they use to manipulate you to get to the end result that they want. So these policy institutes decide what all of our main parties are going to do, but they don't decide it and say, oh, now you've got to do this, and you've got to. They give them to the parties, and the parties say, what can we get from this policy, and what can we get from that policy, and this policy is good. Well, let's not incorporate this one. Let's leave this one out. Let's leave this one. But they're still using the same bucket of policies to choose from. So you're still going to get the same society run by the same people at the end of it. And one day, once globalism has taken over the world and everybody is on board with whatever the future looks like, which the future looks like it's going to be one dull grey colour all over the place,
Yeah, but we'll be happy. We'll learn nothing, eat bugs, and be happy, Johnny. Don't forget that.
Yeah, I know, and that's the thing, is that all of those parties will lead you in different ways to own nothing and eating bugs. The middle bit all looks different. We think it's all different right now.
But then how are they controlled? Why does... Because there are people like Orban and Putin that were global leaders or young leaders, and they're not following that. But how come Starmer, and I mean, Starmer's just going to be awful, absolutely awful. Starmer and Sunak and
Listen, Orban and Putin are following the lines. They're following the lines. Putin was part of a different course. It seems to be young Russian Patriot Awards or something, created at the same time as the Global Leaders for Tomorrow. He went through it there was 3 Russians who went through it. Putin ends up being the one that Yeltsin points at in 1999 and says he's your new leader. That's how it gets elected. What's he doing? What's he doing? He's just another color of the same box. So he's incorporating Sberbank app, which will be everything goes through the Sberbank app. In China, it's WeChat. Over here, it's X. He will be incorporating CBDCs. China will be incorporating CBDCs. The West will be incorporating CBDCs. Vaccine rollouts happen differently in each country, but they happen, and the agenda is followed exactly the same. AI is being created and incorporated into technology in the same way. It's all the same agenda just different flavors. It's all the same side of the box. Viktor Orban is your Hegelian dialectic. Viktor Orban didn't only go through the World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders first year, the Global Leaders for Tomorrow program. He also went through the Marshall Memorial Foundation program, which is CIA. That's the CIA. You're going through the CIA leadership program. If you're going into the German Marshall Fund and you're going through that program, you are going through the CIA. Viktor Orban is then, what is he? He's standing there on the edge of Europe in a very important place. Like, nearly every single war has started because there's friction within roughly that area of the world. And he's standing there being like, I'm against everything that all of these guys are doing. I disagree with everything. I'm your savior. Now, that's the Hegelian dialectic. They've created the thesis, and now they've created the antithesis. And so Viktor Orban looks like he's the opposite. Again, they're all going to lead you in exactly the same place, but at different times, with different pace, all depending on what they can get away with at any one time. There is no way that any of these guys are any different. All of them are leading us to the same place. Every single one of them. They may look like they're the opposite, but that's what they do. They just paint different colors on. We get the same. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's fascinating. And is that the same for Trump and Lukashenko in Belarus? Because Belarus didn't have a lockdown.
So you look at Trump and Corbyn are really interesting. They happen basically around the same time, yeah? Corbyn rises to power roughly the same time Trump rises to power. What is happening at that time? The New Democrats have trained New Labour in the early 90s. So all of that, and this is going to be in an article I'm writing soon, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Yvette Cooper, Ed Balls, Ed Miliband, John Prescott, others, they all hanging around before they get power in Labour, before they get real power, when John Smith is in charge, they're all hanging around in Bill Clinton's presidential campaign, all taking notes about New Democrat way. New Labour is created from that, of course. So you've got these. They know they're going to be creating these people well in advance. Well in advance. I mean, so far in advance. And what happens? New Democrat and New Labour happens. They fail miserably, like most of these. They're putting in policies. They're just globalist policies. They're basically, if you listen to all of the words of Clinton and all of the words of Blair and all of the words of people around them, the globalist, and they're pushing globalism. By the time it gets to 2016, everybody is fed up of globalism. They know these guys don't work for them. They know New Labour are fake. They know the Democrats are fake. They can smell it. And what happens? Then the thesis makes the antithesis. They push up Trump, they push up Corbyn, and then they rail against them. They say, look at these evil things. You've chosen them over us, and look how good we are compared to these evil people. Jeremy Corbyn's an anti-Semite. Don't you know Trump's a racist, anti-Semite, racist, anti-Semite? And they use all the tropes to beat down this person that they've lifted to power. Who voted in Jeremy Corbyn? Who got him into the elections, the leadership elections? It was all Brownites. They were all the same people who voted him to originally be selected as leader, were all of the people who were later against him. And so what they do is they create the antithesis so that they can synthesize the antithesis and go up to the next level. And again, you have the thesis, and then you create the antithesis again. So Trump, Corbyn, they're the created antithesis that they can barrage and beat and say, look, they're the worst things ever, to gain power back after they've stagnated, after their power has stagnated. So for that, you need their power to stagnate. What did we see with the Democrat Party and Labour by 2016? Completely. Labour lost nearly all of the heartland in Scotland. They lost the ability to govern anymore. They would not get into power again if the SNP was in charge. How do you solve that? You create the most evil thing you can think of, Jeremy Corbyn. That's the most evil thing they can think of. That's really pathetic. But then they lambast, they beat it, they scream at it. They tell you how stupid you are for trusting these people, and you stop trusting those people. Those are people are brainwashed. They'll just say, all right then, yeah, you're right. I'm with the status quo. I'm with the majority. I'm with the rest of us, and we've made a big mistake by not choosing these guys who were Blairites and Brownites. How did that happen? And there you go. Now we're back into the moment where they've created this themselves. They've got back to power by creating the enemy within.
Okay, and then how does Farage fit into this then?
He's enemy within. So the same thing as as Labour. Labour, Corbyn was left. Farage is right. So Farage, who's Nigel Farage? Where was one of his first companies was Drexel Burnham Lambert. One of the biggest frauds in the USA in US history was where he cut his teeth. Like he is, he dirty. He's hated as a racist. He's painted as this. He's painted as that. I both don't like, with all of these characters, I both don't like Nigel Farage, and I like him very much. I can't help but to like how naturally human he is in the way he acts, how honest he is compared to the rest of the politicians. But the Conservatives are going through that same cycle that Labour went through with Corbyn. They're now lifting him up 100%. I can tell you, it's 100% that Nigel Farage will eventually be the leader of a reformed Conservative Party. This is what happens. The thesis is the Conservative Party. They create the antithesis within the Conservative Party. He used to be Conservative Party, and then they synthesize. Hegelian. It's all the same Hegelian again.
So then, John, are you saying Trump and Corbyn and Farage, is it that they're puppets of the WEF, being controlled by the WEF, or they're just being played?
Yeah, but I would say played. If you think about it this way, the World Economic Forum, or even like Labour Party or Conservative Party, they are in charge of this whole realm. When the Labour Party wanted to turn on Corbyn was alone. It was only Shami Chakrabarti who was standing next to him. Shami Chakrabarti, who's a World Economic Forum young global leader. It's just the same over and over again. The only allies they find are the people who are on the other side, and they listen to them. They talk to them. They're talking in their ears. They're just puppets for the same people.
Like Trump and Pence. Pence betrayed Trump, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
but how do the WEF have so much control over these people? Trudeau and Starmer and Sunak and Ardern.
They've swallowed the globalist pill. They have been told over and over again through all of their entire schooling, through everything through their entire schooling, which is a different schooling that we get. When this was defined in another State Department document in the late 60s, at the same time Herman Kahn was writing the year 2000. He's also writing another one which talks about training leadership groups outside of society, a normal society. So we go to normal school, get given a slave education, and those guys get given a different education elsewhere. So what is different about them? Why do they all eat the pill? Because they've been taught by the people who are giving them the pill. And the majority of them will only get into power and will only be selected for these groups once it's clear they've swallowed the pill. Once it's clear they're on the same agenda, then they'll say, hey, you should go and hang around with this person and this person and this person who are already in power because they've already swallowed the same pill. And so they're just all hanging around together. And if you go into their group, you can think that it's, this is voting. Everybody gets an equal say. There's elections. There's all sorts of things in all of our different systems. And you'll only be elected if you're either on the same side as them, or they can use you as a scapegoat for all of their issues. But other than that, the people who select the people to go into power have all swallowed the bullshit.
Right. And I suppose they will have been bribed, blackmailed.
You don't even have to do that. You just have to put them in the same, but you just have to choose narcissistic, greedy people. And that comes out in people's behavior, all through schooling, all through employment, everything. They rise to the top in some way, and then people will see, oh, they will do what we want them to do, so let's get them to do the thing we want them to do. And it's as simple as that. It really is. There's loads of different ways people look at it. If you look at the Epstein case and you look at how people were blackmailed and stuff, it wasn't just straight sexual compromise like most people want you to think. It is much more like a party boat, where everybody gets on the party boat and they're all enjoying themselves, but you can't get off. And over that time, they will gather information about you, and they will get, all of your dark secrets down. That's for sure. They will, but they won't probably need to use it because they only select people who are going to be doing what they want and who are going to be on their side regardless. So they don't need to have blackmail over people. These people are willing to do it themselves. You select people who are willing to fuck over their own kind.
Right.
That's it.
And then somebody like Trump and Corbyn come along who are not of that camp, and then they still use it or play in order to galvanize their own strength, which from their point of view is a smart strategy. From our point of view, it's terrible. But now, Klaus Schwab recently announced his retirement. So any idea who's gonna replace him? Where direction of the WEF?
I mean, it seems at the moment, there was always the thought: would it be handed down to Nicole Schwab or his son? And no, there's just no way that's going to happen, because there would be too much of a battle afterwards. It's not going to be he was lifetime leader for a long time. Instead, there's going to be a committee. There's going to be a head of the committee, and they're all going to be. It's going to be basically. It's like bringing the CFR out into the public. Then they wanted to do that for a long time. Remember, the World Economic Forum, as I described, was basically created by a load of CFR members who knew that they couldn't continue to do this behind closed doors all the time without raising attention. Eventually, you'd have to go and do it in the public, and you'd have to have a public policy institute. And so that's where it will be run by a board. It'll have a faux elected leader, and it'll still continue with the same policies and move forward with the same ideas, with the same function. And there's now a competing Eastern version like forming, especially with the BRICS nations. Now that the de-dollarization and the petrodollar has ended, another wonderful addition from the Kissinger's closet of things that we didn't want. There's going to be competing structures, and that will all help to bring on globalism faster. Now, there is one thing: he who runs the globe, who's going to win this race? What's going to happen afterwards? Will the globe list be run by the World Economic Forum or etc.? There's something happening in the world that we can see happening, and we're unable to define right now that is happening, and it's an arms race. It's a major arms race. It's the AI arms race. It's the reason why we're probably going to end up in a global conflict at some point soon, is because we're being pushed. Arms races always push you into global conflicts. You have to compete with the rest of the globe. So the First World War was machine guns, biological weapons, air and sea technology. The Second World War was the race to the nuke and race to atomic bomb. They knew it was coming beforehand. It was reaching a crescendo. War happens. Everybody goes for it. Whoever gets it wins. Yeah, that's that's how technology works. You create a conflict, and from that conflict is born the higher level of this technology. And the same will be with AI. We see it utilized on the battlefield, but what people don't realize about AI, one of the sides is going to produce a significant enough AI that can. And this is really simple, really simple. We currently live what I was talking about in a dynamic, in a paradigm of mutually assured destruction. The reason why there's not a nuclear war right now is because if one person presses that button, the other person will press that button. What if you could create a technology, I don't know, like an artificially intelligent technology that could take over all of your enemy's weapon systems? Mutually assured destruction, that paradigm that's been there for all of that time, disappears overnight, and you are the winner of the globalist race. That's it. It's over. Your form of globalism is now in charge because you control all the nukes. You don't just control your nukes, you control their nukes too. And that's why the race to artificial intelligence is that. That's why it's leading to a conflict. That's why we're going to go into a global conflict, because whoever comes out the other side of this will be able to destabilize any nation on earth, will be able to take away all of their defenses, will be able to infiltrate every single part of their deterrence, of their weapons technology, of every single part of their lives. One ring to rule them all, and that's what we're currently heading towards. We're heading towards a technological arms race. So the World Economic Forum is it's just another organization that's leading us to here, and we're there now. We're there. We're at the point where this is what Herman Kahn warned about. He I wouldn't mind to read it out, to be honest. It has become increasingly clear that our technological and even our economic achievements are mixed blessings. Through progress, issues arise such as the accumulation, augmentation, and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the loss of privacy and solitude, the increase of governmental and/or private power over individuals, the loss of human scale and perspective, and the dehumanization of social life, or even of the psychobiological self, the growth of dangerously vulnerable, deceptive, or degradable centralizations of administrative or technological systems, the creation of other new capabilities so inherently dangerous as to seriously risk disastrous abuse, and the acceleration of changes that are too rapid or cataclysmic to permit successful adjustment. Perhaps most crucial, choices are posed that are too large, complex, important, uncertain, or comprehensive to be safely left to fallible humans. I think that says it all. They looked into the future, and what they saw was we're not the ones to make the decisions because we're fallible humans. And so the future should be machine.
Yeah, yeah, which they run and control because they are better than us.
One ring to rule them all, my friend.
Now, what is it, Johnny, that we can do?
This is a question that I've asked myself over and over again. I don't think I can say the answers out loud. Just that I think that gives a clue to everybody what we can do. There's no peaceful solution. There's no way to get around this peacefully. There are a load of psychopathic narcissists who are in control of human evolution, the human race, human technology, everything. And they're about to hand it over to computers. And we're right here now. The scraping of data for AI is the death of humanity. So we're watching it happen now. And we can reverse it, we can stop it, but that means we got to do something. Yeah. And every time we try and do something, they will have a load of different ways to stop us. And most of it is legal. And of course, it comes down to the fact that humans have got to realize at some point, standing up is not pretty. It doesn't lead to people dancing around with flowers and saying, unity, we all love each other, we're all humans. Half the world is narcissistic, half the world is dancing around with flowers. Who's going to win? The ones dancing around with flowers or the narcissists? We got to realize there's another future ahead of us that we could have, but we got to stop the one that's being created now and is being created high speed and is about taking away human control and handing it over to non-fallible creatures.
Yeah. Well, Johnny, there is something that people can do, which is to speak up, share this video. Spread. People should just speak up, speak up, speak up, speak up, speak up, speak up, speak up. If I can just share something personal. So, I work as a social worker, and during lockdown, when it looked like the vaccine mandates were coming, I was like, how am I going to carry on providing for my family if I can't get into the council building? They say you can't come in without that. There's no way I'm having that shit inside me. And I just kept my head down. Didn't want to say anything. Didn't want to draw attention to myself because everybody was wearing masks and getting themselves shot. And then at some point I realized I had to speak up for my own survival because I have to find and create allies. So we have no other choice but to speak up and stand out. And that includes legal, peaceful means of resistance, including non-payment of taxes from bit.ly/makewarhistory. Got to plug that. And also listening to your show and learning from all the guests that you have, and also from Newspace, because you've been covering this. I'm just amazed by your recollection, because you didn't know we were going to talk about this, and your attention to detail and how you've taken us through. And the other thing that I would say, just a bit more, I think what's on the horizon, and actually what's happening, is a movement for decentralization. So yeah, they want to centralize. And at the same time, thanks to blockchain technology, and I'm not talking about Bitcoin here, I'm talking about assets such as Monero and such as Pirate Chain, which are fully decentralized and censorship resistant, including ThreeSpeak, which is on the blockchain, fully decentralized, no ownership, no central point of control. So it's through that emergence of technology, because it's really, really hard for centralization to beat decentralization. And in the end, Johnny, there is the human spirit which shall not be crushed.
I hope so. I hope so. I spent a lot of time hoping that.
Yeah, well, okay, well, it shall not be crushed. We've been here before because it's just a cycle of history. Money collapses, emergence of corruption, elites trying to hold on to all sorts of power, then the money does collapse because their timeline is way out. Their timeline is way out. They're scrambling, they're making mistakes, and all the time the inevitable monetary collapse comes closer and closer. More and more people are waking up. And with the monetary collapse, they're not going to be able to they're not going to be able to bribe people. They're not going to be able to pay functionaries. They're not going to be able to keep replacing the ULEZ cameras that keep getting sawn down, right, by guys with 100-pound angle grinders. How the hell are you going to defeat that, right? So, Johnny, thank you, thank you, thank you. Anything else you want to say before we finish up?
No, I think I want to leave. I do want to leave people with a positive message. It's hard to see positivity when you see that people aren't reacting at the moment when they need to react. So the only thing I want to say is that now is seriously the time. We're way late to the party. I say this a lot. We're really late to the party. We're turning up. We haven't got dressed up, and they're all looking at us. And we now need to do something. If we don't do something now, it could be terrible for our kids. Might not even be kids anymore. They might not even be humans in the future. So we've got to make a change now before we allow that to happen. Otherwise, all love and peace to people. Remember, don't be sad. Don't be beaten down by the fact the world is negative. Hey, if we're at the last point, if we're at Armageddon, if we're at apocalypse, if we're at the point where human race is not going to exist anymore, then this is a party that you should enjoy, and
Got
you
nothing
should
to
go out
lose.
and live your life to the fullest.
That's right. We got nothing to lose. Might as well go hell for leather.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you're 10-0 down against Manchester United. There's only 5 minutes left to play. Go for it.
Long ball, long ball. That's what I
Johnny,
say.
thank you so much. I'll have your links to the article on the newspaper website and TNT and your Twitter in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Please share this video far and wide. And between now and when I see you next, please keep filling your pockets with freedom and power. This is Crypto Rich and Crypto Johnny signing out. All the best. Bye bye.